So, what I want to do is we're going to walk up and look at the creek up here, but I want to talk about what we've done here. This was back in about the time we put the rock here. We put this cedar fence up here. Historically, there really hadn't been much of a fence in here, and the idea was to try to fence off the creek over here, because this is kind of a different situation without going into the whole story. Collins owns the ground here, but we don't own the grazing rights. We traded those away years and years ago. So a different individual has the right to graze every blade of grass out in this meadow. We worked with that individual and his lessees to say, you know what, we understand that it's important, this is great grazing habitat, cows need to have access to the creek, but do they need to have the entire stretch of the creek? Can we just kind of create some spots where they can get down and get some water in the creek and fence off the rest of the creek, try to restore the riparian habitat? Because what was happening was the cows, you know, they love to graze in the creek right here because it's some of the best vegetation. They don't have to go very far. You know, they're kind of like people. They're lazy.
Lazy.
You want to do
opportunists.
Absolutely. And so they had taken out all the vegetation along the creek. Well, what that does is it makes it more susceptible to erosion, and when you get the winter storms that would come down here, it would erode the banks. We're getting this head cutting, so the creek channels were getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and what that does is it actually lowers the water table. So over time, it has a negative impact on the grazing out here too. Because the water table was being lowered and these meadows weren't real wet, you're starting to get conifers come in and invade them. And actually, if there's any part of our ecosystem that's being threatened up in here, it's the high mountain meadows. And they're being threatened by conversion to conifer.
Yeah.
Partly because we don't have the fires in there, partly because we're lowering the water table. So whatever we can do to kind of raise that water table back up is probably a good thing to do. 'Cause, I mean, if you just wanted to grow trees, yeah, you could convert this all there, but then you're going to eliminate a very important part of the total ecosystem. So that was the idea behind fencing this off. Collins worked in cooperation with Department of Fish and Game and Department of Corrections. We supplied the coal cedar logs. Fish and Game kind of oversaw it. They had the, I think it was Ishii crew from down near Paynes Creek, came up. They split everything, built the cedar fence. The reason we wanted to have the cedar fence is because we're in snow country. Barbed wire fences just don't last. The cedar fence out at Childs Meadows has been there for over 100 years.
Gazillion years, yeah.
So the cedar will last. There you go. Yeah. What I wanted to point out here is before we fenced this meadow off, there was no vegetation down here in the banks. So, and actually, we had kind of a 2 or 3 year setback because I think the fencing went in '95, and then it was starting to come back. But then in '97, remember the big event, the rain on snow event we had, washed everything out. Well, it washed out whatever was starting to get in there. So starting in '98, all the vegetation had to get reestablished in here. But this is what's grown up basically since 1998. And the vegetation is important because it helps to stabilize the bank. When it gets large enough, it'll provide some shade to help keep the stream cool. You get the mosquitoes and bugs and stuff that come in around it to feed the fish. Yep.
Do you get much support out of the same people that are trying to lower 1 degree the Feather River?
You know, I don't know that they even know about this.
Yeah. Or talk about the boondoggle.
But what's been really interesting about this is since we've got the willow and the alder that are coming back, and you could walk up there, but when you guys drive back, just look upstream around this corner. You'll see a beaver dam right there. the beavers have moved back into this. The sign says North Fork of Deer Creek. This is actually Guernsey Creek here.
Yeah.
They've moved back into Guernsey Creek. The beavers are all up and down this thing. And what the beavers have done is, because there's some streamside vegetation there that they can use for their dams and to eat, they have built these dams. That's raising the water table.
Which is complementing the deep channel that you had. You're seeing the
Exactly.
meadow again.
The meadow is actually staying greener later into the year. And at first, the guy who owned this, he was a little not too cooperative, because he said, if you exclude one blade of grass from my cows, then we get into all kinds of other problems. But what's ended up happening is he's had more grass for his cows, especially later in the year.
So he's paying more rent now.
Well, yeah, he's not paying anyway because he owns it. But and that's kind of the critical time of year. I mean, there's plenty of feed around here in May and June and July.
Yeah.
It's that September or October before they
Before
get the
they can
valley
move to the
raised
valley.
to move back down is when it's really critical.
Have
So
you-
it's been a win-win-win situation. But we were able to do this because we had generated some dollars from the timber.
Really?
Yeah, kind of funny how that works.
I
huh?
thought it came out of some
So
grant.
Free market? Is that what that
you
free
can
market thing is?
do good things when
If you
you're
have
generating
money.
dollars to make it happen.
And you actually created jobs.